Hello, I'm Mary C. Anderson with Trempealeau County Community Television. And you know, the positive thing we have about Channel 18 here is that we get a lot of feedback from our viewing audience. And over the past few months, I've been approached several times about bringing in some new faces and, you know, having some discussions with people inside of our community as well as outside of the area. And today I have a very special guest with me, and we're going to swing over and I'm going to start the introduction with Mr. Mike McCabe. How are you today, young man?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. You know, we kind of pulled this interview together in pretty short order, but you've got a lot of really cool things coming down the line, don't you?
Well, you know, first and foremost, I'm running for governor. I'm traveling the state and meeting people all across Wisconsin, and I've been doing that for a lot of years in a number of different capacities, but in recent months and really over the course of the last year, people started really pushing me to think about running for governor, and it ended up reaching the point where I announced my candidacy in early September, and have put on 12,000 miles in Wisconsin just since that announcement, going to every nook and cranny of this state, talking to people, particularly in places that really have been forgotten or overlooked by the folks who are running things at the Capitol. And I've gone to a lot of places where you can't blame people for wondering if the folks who are in charge of things at the Capitol even know that they're out there. There's too many forgotten places and too many forgotten people who really aren't getting representation, and I want to give it to them.
Well, you know, it's so ironic that you bring that up, because I've been on the road myself quite a bit over the last couple of weekends. And, you know, I do a lot with conservation, and I work a lot directly with farmers. And I've heard a lot of, you know, I'm tired of hearing about things that are going on after it's too late for me to have an opinion, for me to make a phone call. And now, Mike, we're just going to take a step back, because we'd like to get to know you. Why don't you fill me in? I hear that you hail from over in that beautiful Clark County region.
I do. I'm the one candidate in the race who was born and raised on a farm. I grew up on a family dairy farm outside of a little town named Curtis, which is in Clark County, about halfway between Eau Claire and Wausau. So that's my home turf, and it's also that rural upbringing that really shaped me and has had everything to do with not only the way I've gone about living my life, but also it's the reason why I'm now running for governor. I just see so many challenges in Wisconsin, and particularly so many challenges for rural Wisconsin. And most of those problems aren't getting discussed at the Capitol. They're certainly not focused on trying to solve any of the problems or deal with any of the challenges that people face in rural parts of the state. That breaks my heart. And so it has everything to do with that rural upbringing that I'm doing now, what I've undertaken in this race for governor.
Now let's talk a little bit about your careers through life, because you obviously just didn't graduate from high school and decide, you know, I'm going to throw my hat into this very, very competitive race that we're looking forward to down the road. Tell us a little bit about your work experience, a little bit about how you've gained the tools that you think will be needed and necessary and beneficial to help make some change.
Yeah, you know, I've spent decades as an independent watchdog trying to get government to work well for regular people, and trying to fight the influence of big money in politics, and try to get regular folks a voice and a seat at the table at the Capitol, and give them real representation. And, you know, I started a group called the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign that focused a lot on exposing the influence of big money in politics, but also worked to try to make our democracy healthier in a lot of other ways too. More recently, I started another citizen group called Blue Jean Nation that really is aimed at trying to organize people at the grassroots level to challenge the political establishment to change its ways, to try to get regular people both a voice and an opportunity to be in the driver's seat of our government. I've watched our political culture change so dramatically over the course of my adult life. I'm 57, so it's a long time since I graduated from high school, but I'll tell you, over the course of all those decades, I've watched Wisconsin go from a place that was known from coast to coast as a beacon of clean and open and honest government, a government that really worked for regular people, to a political culture that I think has been poisoned, and a political system that works really, really well for a wealthy and well-connected and privileged few, but it's failing most of the population. And that, of course, then ends up breeding an economy that benefits those at the very top but leaves an awful lot of people behind. And it's those conditions that motivate me to try to jump in the ring and offer a really different kind of leadership and a very different vision for our state to try to move us in a different direction. Over all these years, my heart's never left agriculture. I've remained very, very involved and have been involved with organizations like Wisconsin Farmers Union, and they even singled me out and named me friend of the family farmer a couple of years ago because of my work to try to create sustainable agriculture in our state. And a lot of what I've seen happen to agriculture over the years has really got me very concerned as well. So that's very much at the heart of what I'm doing now, and very much at the heart of what's behind a citizen effort like Blue Jean Nation to try to shake up and transform the political system that we've got.
Now, I'm a little more familiar with some of the political terms, but for our audience, let's just take just a couple minutes, define what a watchdog group is. Mm-hmm. Let's put a little more structure on what does that actually mean. Well,
I've actually worked for a couple of the most fiercely independent and highly respected watchdog groups that Wisconsin has known. I worked for 6 years for the Wisconsin Taxpayers Alliance. Now that's a citizen group that really bird dogs how our taxes are spent and make sure that
they keep an eye on things.
They keep an eye on how our tax money is spent and blows the whistle when anything is seen.
When red flags come up?
Yeah, when something doesn't look right, it's a watchdog's duty to bark and to let people know that something's not right. With the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, that was much more focused on trying to expose the influence of big money in politics and how those really wealthy donors influence our elected officials and end up getting our elected officials to cater to them, to act on their behalf and ignoring the
constituent votes that got them into office?
Yeah, and I think what I've seen over the course of the last several decades is a lot of times the cash constituents come out ahead of the voting constituents. Voters want one thing and the big wealthy donors want another, and they get their way. The donors end up getting government to do what they want. And this is a state where Bill Proxmire once got elected for 30 years to the United States Senate, and he never once spent $300 on one of his statewide campaigns for office. His last race, he won by a landslide. He spent $145.10 on his whole statewide campaign. Now we've seen statewide elections in Wisconsin cost as much as $80 million. And that money comes from...
That number is just unreal.
I know. And
later in our interview, I'm going to tell you what I think should be done for campaign reform. But it's an incredible amount of money for a job that pays what?
Well, legislators get paid a little bit north of $45,000. The governor's salary is a little bit over $150,000. One of the things I've said all along here as I've run for governor is that if I'm elected, I'm not going to live in the governor's mansion, and I'm not going to take the full salary of the governor. I'll be paid $1 less than the average Wisconsin worker makes. And that's part of the commitment that I have to really demonstrating what public service ought to be about. To me, governors should be servants and not masters, and to me that puts a governor under the people, not above them. And to me, it's really important to send a message to people that that people in government are supposed to be working for ordinary folks. They're supposed to be working for all of the people of Wisconsin, not simply catering to the very small segment of the population that ends up producing all the $80 million worth of donations that bankroll these campaigns. And then they look for a return on that investment. They expect government to do what they want, and it's all done at the expense of 5.5 million people in this state. And that's just messed up. It's wrong. That system has got to be challenged and transformed.
And now, when do you think this political shift, because you really, even if you look at national politics, right now there's been some really big chasms and divisions created where it seems like we're entering a very, very concerning period of political disrest, social unrest, the amount of unrest within the population on a day-to-day basis, the list seems to be growing. When do you think that tide began to change, and what do you think the catalyst was that drove that change?
I'm old enough to remember a time when Wisconsin politics was radically different than it is now, and we had a system that was known as really a squeaky clean system. We were known for clean and open and honest government all across the nation, and that was a deserved reputation. But I started noticing real signs of trouble in the late 1980s or early 1990s, and I saw it intensify, and by the time we got to the 21st century, our political culture had changed radically. Now we're all being told that we're all being told that there's this huge rural-urban divide, or there's this big divide between left and right. To me, the big divide in American politics is not between rural and urban people. It's not between the left and the right. It's really a divide between top and bottom.
So the haves versus the have-nots.
And it's not only those at the very top economically. It's not only those with most of the money, and they have gotten vastly wealthier, even as we're leading the nation in shrinkage of the middle class here in Wisconsin, and we've got economic inequality at levels not seen since the Great Depression. But I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about power. I'm talking about who has a voice that's heard and whose voices are ignored. And that's the real divide in American politics right now, is those at the very top and the rest of us. And the people who are trying to struggle to stay in the middle class or have even fallen into poverty, some of them live in rural areas, some of them live in inner cities. Some of them consider themselves Democrats, some consider themselves Republicans, most of them consider themselves neither. Most people are disgusted with both parties. And we have got to put principle over party, and we have got to get government working for regular people and have an economy that benefits all of us and not just a privileged few. And that's our challenge, and I think that's the divide we really have to concern ourselves about, is this divide between those at the very top, the royals of our society, and the commoners in our society.
One thing that really resonates is the fact that so many people, they have these staunch beliefs. We have this huge influx of information, whether it's real information or false information or what have you. And there seems to be a lack of willingness, not only at the coffee table in town, but at the Capitol in Madison, as well as the Capitol in Washington, D.C., where the communication has broken down to the point where people cannot have a thought-out discussion about what is best for the people. Everyone falls back on, well, this is what my party thinks, this is what that party thinks, and we can't negotiate, we can't have an adult conversation about where we should move forward. And so I'm seeing a lot of political activity being not political activity. Instead of something happening, everybody's digging in their heels, and nothing positive is being done.
I have not seen this much division in our society in my adult life. And you know, this country's gone through a lot. It's gone through a civil war. It's gone through 2 depressions. It's gone through 2 world wars. So I'm sure that there have been times where the republic was it's at an even more dangerous moment than we are now. But this is a pretty dangerous moment because an awful lot of people are at each other's throats. There's so much division there, and you know, one of the things I've found is that if we can get past labels and we can talk to each other, it's amazing how often we'll find common ground on some things. We'll disagree about some stuff. But
you know what? That's okay to disagree.
Exactly. And you know, I've never belonged to a political party. And there are some in the political arena, the staunch partisans who think that makes that there's something wrong with me because I haven't belonged to a political party. But that's something that I have in common with 5.5 million people in this state. Only a few thousand people actually are card-carrying members of a party. Most people don't have that association. And if we can get beyond those labels and just talk to each other, we can find a lot of common ground. And we'll disagree on certain things, and that's okay. But we'll also figure out a way to hash out our differences. But I tell you, if city people and people who live out in the country see each other as enemies, and people who are Democrats or Republicans or on the left or on the right are taught to see each other as enemies, and we stop talking to each other, then this problem is going to just get bigger. And that's a big part of what motivates me. I haven't been a member of a party. We've got a really strong 2-party system in this country. It's next to impossible to run as an independent or a third-party candidate. It just doesn't lead anywhere good. So I've entered the Democratic primary. I'm running as a Democrat, but I'm really running as an independent in the Democratic Party primary because I haven't belonged to a party. I think that's part of the secret of what enables me to go out to a local coffee shop or a cafe or you know, whether I'm in a small town. I was just in places like Trigo or Iron River or Delta way up north near Lake Superior. You know, you go through in Balsam Lake not too long ago. I can go into a coffee shop or a cafe, strike up a conversation with people, and I can find common ground with them. And maybe it's because of those rural roots of mine that I grew up on the farm. But I can go into inner city Milwaukee, and I can go right into the heart of the biggest city in this state, and I can talk to people there and find common ground. And they seem to fear each other. The people in Balsam Lake are, you know, think that they're the enemies of the people living in inner city Milwaukee, and we've actually got way more in common than we've been taught to believe, and we've got to overcome those differences.
Well, and I often wonder, because I read a lot of news, I try to pay attention to what's going on, I try to choose a variety of different sources to try to get I'm kind of a holistic kind of a person. You want to take a look at the whole playing field and then kind of figure out how that all fits together to make the puzzle. Mm-hmm. And do you think that there's some attempts with, I don't know, out there in the underground, really, because if you can cultivate a little bit of fear that it is the left versus the right,
yep,
that it is the city versus the country,
yep,
that it automatically, instead of uniting, it puts people on a defensive, mm-hmm, because now we begin to fear what we really don't know,
yeah,
because we haven't taken the time to sit down and have a mature, thought out discussion, mm-hmm, about, hey, you like Levi's, I like Keys, they're both really good, so hey, we can agree to disagree,
yeah,
but also carry through with the merits that if these are companies that are working here within Wisconsin that are making Wisconsin strong, producing tax dollars, producing jobs, that's okay.
Yeah,
that's a good thing.
You know, I think the big money interests that have a stranglehold on our capital have a lot to gain by making sure that we're divided at each other's throats, and similarly the politicians who have gotten elected with all that big money support and now lord over us at the Capitol, they have a great interest in seeing division and seeing people looking at each other as enemies, because it is divide and conquer politics. That's what it is. we have to be smart enough to figure out how to get beyond that, and
safety in numbers.
We have to escape those traps. And look, if you go to the big city, you'll run into people who used to work in a factory, and they earned $25 or $30 an hour, and they were doing great, and they were in the middle class, and those factories have disappeared, and now the best they can find is maybe $10 or $11 an hour, and the cost of living is higher in the city than it is out in the country. And so they watch their standard of living cut in half. We are leading the nation in shrinkage of the middle class here in Wisconsin. We've seen recently saw our poverty rate reach a 30-year high. So a lot of people have slipped out of the middle class, and now they're working every day. And some of them have 2 and 3 jobs, and yet they can't make it. They can't keep themselves in the middle class. We've got this strategy about how to create a sturdy economy that Wisconsin's been following for decades now, that is about feeding the rich. It's showering tax breaks and state subsidies on a few thousand people, or a few huge corporations, or one global conglomerate from Taiwan, with the hope that some of that will filter down to the rest of the population. And it hasn't filtered.
Now, do you think that model, let's talk about the political model.
Yeah.
I remember Reaganomics. And Reaganomics was that trickle-down environment. And has that just been carried forward for decades?
Really, for 4 decades now, that's been the strategy for building a sturdy economy. And I think we actually have to do a complete about-face. Instead of showering tax breaks and subsidies on a few with the hopes they'll work some magic for the rest of us, we've got to take our resources and use them to empower 5.5 million people in this state to do more for themselves and for each other. We've got to boost wages. We've got to create health care access for all. We've got to make education and job training affordable and debt-free. We've got to bring high-speed internet to every doorstep, every household, everywhere in the state. How do you fully participate in a 21st century economy, or even fully participate in modern American life, without a tool like high-speed internet? Yet half of rural Americans don't have access to high-speed internet.
Well, and
we need to bring that everywhere so that people can start small businesses where they live, where they're rooted, and it really putting money in the pockets of regular working people. That's the way to drive the economic growth, because when people have more money in their pockets, they spend it. That makes better business for somebody. And that business then is more prosperous, and they spend money, and some other business benefits from that. And there's a ripple effect throughout the entire economy. This top-down approach has failed us for 4 decades, and we're now leading the nation in shrinkage of the middle class. We're dead last in new business startups, 3 years in a row in Wisconsin. Instead, we've got to build the economy from the bottom up, empower regular people to do more for themselves and for their neighbors and for each other. Well,
now, you coming from a dairy farm history, a dairy farm background, just kind of give me your opinion on, now Wisconsin, we're below 10,000 dairy farmers. The dairy industry is not just the farmer milking that cow in the barn.
Right.
The dairy industry is huge. Yet we're seeing this exodus and an attempt at vertical integration. How can we politically kind of turn a blind eye? I remember a few years back when the auto industry was in trouble, and granted, there's only a handful of those big guys out there within the auto industry, but great strides were taken to save or to rescue or to buffer that industry from certain collapse. And yet here we're seeing Wisconsin's biggest industry suffer. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, the small to moderate sized dairy farm, they are, we should be talking Endangered Species Act here to keep these folks on the land. Kind of tell me what your opinion is on the dairy industry.
We've been losing 1,000 farms a year, and if I had been born 10 years earlier or 10 years later, I might still be trying to farm today. But I graduated from high school in 1978, and the farm economy was brutal in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and so many farmers went out of business, and there were so many foreclosures, and we had a neighbor hang himself in the shed and commit suicide one harvest season because the bank was coming out and saying we're foreclosing. and they were going to be moved off their land. And when that's your life experience, when you're looking at that and you're 18 years old and you're thinking, can I make it? Or is that going to be me someday?
Right.
Now, if I had been born a little bit different time, maybe I'd still be plugging away, but we are losing 1,000 farms a year, and what pains me is that our government has been put squarely on the side of the industrialization of agriculture, the huge operators, most of them coming from out of state.
Yes.
They're coming from places like Iowa and Texas and Oklahoma. They're moving here, they're buying up land, and they're running these massive factory feedlots, and I think we should put government on the side of smaller scale sustainable agriculture, because I just think the way agriculture is evolving is not sustainable over the long haul. I don't think it's sustainable for the land, the air, the water, the people, the animals. I don't think that we're on a path that leads to a kind of agriculture that won't end up poisoning the neighbors. And to me, one of the things that is very important in farming is that you do it in a way that doesn't poison your neighbors. You want to make a living, and you got to make a profit, and you've got to make ends meet on that farm. And there were tough decisions. We decided to forego health insurance for years and years, and we were dairy farmers, but we didn't actually eat the cheese our milk went to make. We ate Velveeta to cut costs and to try to keep our heads above water. But still, even as you were doing those things to remain profitable, you had to also do it in a way that wouldn't poison the neighbors' wells and wouldn't.
Well, exactly.
And we're losing that now. You go to some place like Kewaunee County or Calumet County, and I've been in kitchens where people turn on their water faucets and what comes out is brown and smells like cow manure. They can't drink what comes out of their own water faucet because of these massive operations that are able to write their own pollution permits. Now, your small family farmer has never been in a position to be able to do that.
Absolutely not.
So that's the kind of thing that I think our government has to be put on the side of the smaller scale sustainable agriculture. If we're going to incentivize agriculture, it should be that smaller scale sustainable agriculture.
You're not polluting the surface water, you're not polluting the groundwater.
And it can be done.
Yes.
There are farmers out there who are operating profitably and sustainably. And to me, there needs to be 3 healthy bottom lines in business, not just one. The one bottom line, of course, is profitability.
Yes.
You got to be able to keep your head above water and make a profit. That's solid business sense. But you also have to treat workers well, and you have to treat the earth well. You have to have 3 healthy bottom lines. You can't poison the neighbors and mistreat workers and contaminate our water or our air or leave the land basically dead.
Well,
you can't do those.
If we lose all of our topsoil, an urban friend of mine doesn't really understand why I call myself a soils junkie. And I told her, I said, picture it like this. The soil is your skin, okay? You sustain a burn, and you lose a layer of that skin. Mm-hmm. And then that skin, what's underneath, gets burned again. How long do you think how many burns are you going to get before your hand can't take it anymore?
Right.
And she was just like, wow, I never thought about it like that. Every inch of topsoil we lose, and we see it. Another program that I work on, the Farmer's Corner, we talk at length about soil conservation, building microbiology in the soil, et cetera, et cetera. And if we're not careful, we do live in a brittle, a fragile environment. And that environment has to sustain us.
And I've actually seen in various parts of the state, younger people who seem both willing and anxious to return to the land.
Yes.
They want to get back out there and they want to farm, but they don't want. But
nobody wants to live in destitution to do it.
They don't want to run a factory. They don't want to be in industry. They want to farm. They actually want to farm. They want to work the land, and we should have a government that's committed to helping make that possible, because that's good for the food supply. It's good for our land and our air and our water. It's good for the neighbors who aren't farming.
Right. It's good for the neighborhood.
It is. And that's the kind of agriculture that we should be incentivizing. And it's something that I've been really passionate about for a lot of years. So you can take the boy off the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the boy.
I laugh.
It stays in you.
I think it's a disease. You just, you always got cow issues. You just can't.
It stays in you.
The 12-step program.
So I don't even know that the 12 steps will take it out of you.
Well, now I've got, interestingly enough, when we were talking about the state of the farm economy, you kind of threw in that health care. And, I work with a lot of farm families that really it's almost criminal. The high deductibles, the high monthly payments. And yes, there's dangerous work on a farm. You can get pinned, you can get crushed, you can get ran over, PTO shafts, silo unloaders, big tractors, the whole 9 yards. It's a very, very dangerous occupation. And yet these people who are working really 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, have the only way they can get coverage is if it's catastrophic.
Right.
So some of these families have $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 deductibles per person in order for them to be able to afford health insurance. Talk to me about the health insurance crisis.
Like I said before, our family decided to forego health insurance to remain profitable, and I actually, my brother was unloading some feed with a pitchfork and tossed the pitchfork out in the cart, and it ran through my hand. And I wasn't taken to the doctor. My mom just wrapped a poultice of Epsom salts around my hand and tried to prevent infection. And today, basically, farmers are in the same position, even if they have health insurance, because they pay these monthly premiums that some of them can't even really afford.
Yes.
But then the deductibles and copays are so high that they end up paying for all of their medical care out of pocket anyway. And so you can't blame them for saying, why am I paying these premiums when I don't ever have the insurance kick in and pay any of the medical expense unless I get so sick that I land in the hospital for an extended stay?
Right.
And we've got this program called Badger Care in Wisconsin that the premiums are on average 23 or 24% less expensive than what's out there on the private insurance market, and it's good insurance that actually pays 100% of medical expenses. So you don't have these huge copays and these huge deductibles. You actually get 100% of your medical expenses paid, and your premiums are lower. And if we changed one word in state law, we could make Badger Care a public option available to anybody in the state regardless of income. Anybody could buy in to Badger Care. So for me, we should make Badger Care an option that is available to anybody, because what they're buying now is expensive as far as monthly premiums, and then it
covers nothing.
And it covers nothing, and they end up paying for their medical expenses out of pocket. So we could put farmers, all farmers, in a position of being able to have affordable, quality health insurance if we made Badger Care a public option that would be out there on the insurance exchange and anybody could buy it on the marketplace. I think that would be something that I would propose in the very first state budget I would introduce as governor. To help farmers, getting them access to health care, making sure that high-speed internet reaches every single community, everywhere. Those are critical things.
That internet access is huge. And I know, because I spend a lot of time on the road. I travel roughly anywhere 20, 30 county region. So I move around the state a lot. And, I talk to young parents who live at the back of dead-end valleys who don't have that. And then the kids come home from school, and because of the school and the educational system's acceptance of technology, these families are going, my kid can't do his homework because we don't have the capability to access the internet in such a way for these advanced programs to work out here in the field. And so let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the kids are disadvantaged. But I was talking to a dairy farmer in Dodge County, down in the Beaver Dam and Waupun area. He came up to me and he said, it's pretty darn hard to run a business out here nowadays without the internet, because now they tell me that I'm supposed to file payroll taxes. He's got a few employees on the farm. He runs it's a family operation, but it's a relatively big one. He said, they tell me I'm supposed to file payroll taxes online. How do I file payroll taxes online if I don't have internet access?
Yes.
They don't want me to do it on paper anymore, but I don't have what it takes to be able to do what they tell me I have to do. And he said, I'd love to check commodity prices or stock prices on the internet. You know, that's what everybody else around the country is able to do, and I can't because of lack of internet access. And then you brought up the point, even your kids then are disadvantaged when they go to school and they come home and they're supposed to do homework that involves them getting on the internet, and they can't get on it. So we need something that's the modern day equivalent of rural electrification. When you think about how rural electrification revolutionized the rural economy and revolutionized rural life, and made it possible to milk cows with all those milking machines
with light bulbs.
Exactly. and there was a national effort to take power lines to every barn and every farmhouse down every back road. And if it had been left to the electric companies, there would be major swaths of America that would still be dark today.
Yes.
It took a public effort, it took a national effort to make sure that electricity got to every barn and every farmhouse, and it happened.
The grassroots.
And today, if it's left to the big telecoms, there are going to be huge parts of rural America that the high-speed internet will never reach. And it's going to take a public-private partnership. It's going to take that effort. And so to me, that's the kind of thing we should be investing our resources in. Empowering regular people to be able to start and run businesses in their own backyards where they're rooted. Yep. You don't, I hear people say, well, all these rural folks just need to move to the city. And because the internet's there. Well, I'll tell you, there are neighborhoods in big cities that don't have decent internet access. But look, people need to be able to live and succeed and start and run successful businesses where they live, where they grew up, where they're rooted. And I'm committed to using our resources that way instead of just feeding the rich with the blind faith that some of what they're given will trickle down to the rest of us. No, we've got to directly empower regular people.
Now, how many different communities since your announcement have you visited? You said you put on something crazy like 12,000 miles. Wow, that's almost as much as I drive.
Well, that's just since September 12th.
Oh my goodness.
Over 12,000 miles going to all the way north to Lake Superior, all the way south to the Illinois border, all the way west to the Mississippi. And then to Lake Michigan to the east in places like Green Bay and Door County. So it's been just dozens and dozens and dozens of small towns and local coffee shops and cafes and bowling alleys and churches and all kinds of places in small communities around the state. But then also trips to inner city Milwaukee as well, and places.
The forgotten places.
And that's to me my commitment is to go to the forgotten places where there are forgotten people, and the Milwaukee, the suburbs around Milwaukee have enormous political clout, and that's where a lot of the political money comes from. And then of course Dane County and the Madison area, a lot of attention gets paid there. And you go so many other parts of the state, and I've had people say, candidates for governor never come here. What are you doing here?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you live in this state. You deserve representation too, and I aim to give it to you. Well, and
even myself, it was just like, wow. I did a little bit of research before we got together today because I need to have some tools to know what I'm walking into. And I was surprised to look at your map because to me it almost looked like a map from like maybe the 1930s or 40s where you were on a train with a banner, going, hey, look at me.
Yeah.
When we look at how most of campaigning is done today, it's not at the coffee shop for a position as high up on the food chain
right.
as a governor.
Right.
And so to see you reaching out to those rural communities, have you been well received? How has that experience been for you?
It's been terrific. Everywhere I go, first of all, people are surprised to see me there, and they're amazed that I've made the trip. But then they have a lot on their minds that they want to share, and I let them tell me what's on their minds. But then they're also interested in picking my brain, and They want to know what I'm seeing and hearing elsewhere around the state, because a lot of them feel really cut off. But you know, the mold, the way campaigns are being run nowadays, that mold's got to be broken.
Yeah, I agree.
Because what candidates for governor spend all their time doing is just, they spend their time on the phone begging rich people for money. And then at the very end, they use that money to pay for a bunch of TV ads. And that's what passes for campaigning today.
TV ads and glossies.
Yeah.
That fill your mailbox.
Yep, and they spend all their time raising money and raising money and raising money from a tiny section of society that writes huge checks, and then they spend it all on that advertising at the last minute, and that's how they think they win elections. But what that misses is the opportunity to really understand what people are challenged by and what they're struggling with in places all across Wisconsin that don't get attention from the candidates for office. And I think you got to break that mold. You got to go out there and be willing to meet with people. Let them vent. Let them give them a piece of your mind. And if they're angry, let them share that anger. But then start to look for common ground. Look for where we might find some solutions to this and how we can hash out our differences. It's been a wonderful journey so far. It really has. I mean, it's only been a couple months since I announced the candidacy, but I have traveled over 12,000 miles, and there's many thousands of miles more to come, because the primary election's not until August 14th of 2018. So this is going to be a really long journey, a very grueling adventure. But to me, the thing that is so wonderful about it is just all the people you meet along the way, and what they can teach you, what they can help you understand about places you've never lived. I've lived in Clark County. I know what it's like to grow up on a dairy farm. You know, but there's so many parts of the state that I've never lived in. I've visited, but I've never lived there, and there's so much to learn from people there. They've got wonderful stories to tell, but they've just got great insights to share. Well, to me, an elected representative of the people should have that insight.
They should kind of know the people.
Yep, you got to know the people.
All the people.
Exactly.
I mean, as best as you can.
Exactly.
With a variety of demographic groups that are out there.
Exactly.
And now you kind of threw your hat into kind of a crowded political ring.
Yeah.
How many total candidates are now officially on the list?
Well, you know, I think there's now I think 9 official candidates in the Democratic primary. I think, and I don't think the field is fully formed yet. I think there's more to come. We might end up with a Baskin Robbins primary with 31 flavors. I don't know. But it's going to be a large field. But to me, I wouldn't be in this field. I wouldn't have jumped in if I didn't see something missing. When I look at the others who've lined up to run, they're all accomplished people. And it's been a pleasure getting to know them at the forums that we've been doing around the state together. But I see at least 2 things that they have in common that I don't share. One is that they all seem too comfortable operating within the political system as it currently functions. They seem at peace with the political culture, and I'm not. I think the system's failing us. I think the political culture's been poisoned, and I think that system's got to be shaken up and transformed. And the other thing is, on the Democratic side, they all seem to talk a lot about what's wrong with Scott Walker, but they don't talk much about what they're for. They don't talk much. The
solution on the other side of the coin.
Yeah, they don't talk much about what they think Wisconsin has the potential to become and how we reach that potential. And to me, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Is talking to people in Wisconsin about what this state should be, what it has the potential to be. We're leading the nation in shrinkage of the middle class. We're dead last in new business startups.
Those are a couple of little red flags that should, in 2017 technology, higher thought, higher advanced education, that we should be able to figure out some solutions,
and we got small towns that are digging up pavement and putting down gravel because they can't afford to keep filling the potholes. You've got people, as I said earlier, who are afraid to drink what comes out of their own water faucet.
And
we've got problems to solve, but we've then got to talk about how we empower 5.5 million people to make the state,
to get the job done.
To get the job done and to make this state what it's capable of being. I look at Minnesota across the border, and that's a state that was always a twin of ours. We were so similar in so many ways, similar populations, similar economics, similar in so many ways, similar landscape. And in recent years, Minnesota has separated from us, and it's doing way better economically than Wisconsin. Now, the interesting thing is Minnesota decided to raise taxes on the rich and raise education spending, and we cut taxes on the rich and cut education spending. And they surged ahead of us. So we've got to think about a different approach to empowering regular people and to make Wisconsin what it has the potential to be. We can't simply tell people over and over again how Scott Walker has followed up. Well, we got to talk about what Wisconsin should do.
Should go from here.
Yep.
And you know, I've never been a big fan of what I like to call black eye politics.
Right.
You know, because as much as I would like to say that I'm perfect, of course, my viewing audience knows that I am. No, we're just teasing. It's one of those things. We're human.
Yep.
And as long as we're willing to take the high road, and as much as I would like to be right on everything that I have discussion with, you know what? I'm not always right.
Right.
And sometimes some of my biggest adversaries are those with a contending viewpoint. If you sit down, if you have a cup of coffee with them, have a mature, adult, thought-out conversation, you're going to find out once you get behind the attitude, we're not that far away in terms of having an end goal.
Yep.
Because no one wants hungry children. No one wants an education system that's falling apart.
Right.
You know, there's common things for the greater of the good.
Yep.
That if we put our fists down, take a deep breath and have a discussion, maybe we can get further ahead.
Yep. I'll be honest with people and let them know where I'm coming from. And I've got no problems with people coming up and saying, I think you're full of it. And then let's hash that out. But to me, the bottom line is still giving people leadership that is about helping them and making our government work for all of us and not just a privileged few. I can't take the $20,000 checks that people can legally give a candidate for governor. I can't in good conscience take those checks because I know the strings that are attached to those checks. I know the expectations that come with those checks. And I know that the people who write those checks want our government to do something very different than most people want our government to do. So I won't take a single donation over $200 in this campaign. This is going to have to be a campaign that is grassroots, people-powered, crowd-funded. It's going to have to be a lot of people giving small amounts of money and giving of their time. This is going to have to be a campaign that is in living rooms and at kitchen tables all across the state. That's the only way I know how to give people their government back and give people a system that will work for them and not just those who write those $20,000 checks.
And you know, that's refreshing to hear. And I talked at the beginning of our discussion that I would tell you my super secret tax reform, and it's not really a tax reform, it's just campaign reform.
Yep.
Because I think we have to start someplace. I'm running for president of Trempealeau County. You're running for president of Trempealeau County. These are made-up government entities, by the way. You know, and whether you're running for president of the United States or the clerk at your local church, okay, if I raise $50 in campaign donations, half of that has to go back for debt reduction for whatever office I'm running for. And so now let's take a presidential, we'll move this discussion right out of the state of Wisconsin, a presidential election, and people are raising $100 million. Half of that would have to go back for debt reduction.
We've had $80 million elections for
Isn't
statewide
that
office in
crazy?
Wisconsin.
I know.
Think
Isn't
about
that
what
crazy?
$80 million could do to make our state better.
Think about what $40 million would do at debt reduction. Then maybe the cities in the northern part of Wisconsin that still have broken infrastructure from the floods 2 years ago would be able to get some assistance to get the roads fixed.
Amen, Mary C.
Hey, you bet. And Mike, congratulations
Thank you.
on jumping into this endeavor. And hopefully we'll be able to touch base with you down the road.
That would be
Thank
terrific.
you for coming into the studio here today and spending some time with us.
Thanks for having me.
Best of luck, sir.
All right, thank you.